Put it on Twitter at Ryan Hickey Show. Should the Jets tank to draft to draft Trevor Lawrence? Put it on Instagram as well. Should the Jets tank to draft Trevor Lawrence? And the reason why I put that question out there, and I want to get your thoughts and your response leading into the show, is because I believe a brand new quarterback market is going to develop starting this offseason. Some of the questions that we had last offseason about a few franchise quarterbacks heading to this year, I think kind of put the wheels in motion. Now, as we've seen so far, the struggles for some teams already, starting 0-2 if you're the Jets, 0-2 if you're the Giants. Mitchell Trubisky's 2-0, but the Bears' offense has not looked good, and he really hasn't played that great, to be honest. But the wheels, honestly, were put in motion a few years ago. It started with something the Arizona Cardinals did. They started a trend that I personally believe is going to become a lot more popular as the years go on, and that is the trend of getting rid of young quarterbacks that you draft high, moving on from them very quickly, and basically drafting new ones a lot earlier and shortening that leash that normally franchise quarterbacks drafted in the first round, quarterbacks drafted in the top 10 would have compared to what we've really known up to this point. Right? The Cardinals, what they did, they drafted Josh Rosen number 10, had a brutal year. Josh Rosen didn't start the whole year, but they saw enough to where they said, you know what? This is not a guy we're going to move on. They drafted Kyler Murray. They hired Cliff Kingsbury 1 year. 1 year after drafting Josh Rosen number 10, they drafted Kyler Murray number 1. They cut bait with their top 10 pick 1 year in. And to me, this is a trend that's going to continue. It's going to keep on happening more and more often. And this is going to widen the gap between the haves in the NFL and the have-nots in the NFL starting this offseason. This offseason, we're going to see the first iterations of it. We're going to see the first drops. And from there, I think it's going to continue. There'll be a deluge in a few years. And the reason why the gap, in my mind, is going to widen between the haves and the have-nots is simple. The way teams find their franchise quarterbacks is about to change again starting this offseason. It is about to become a lot more easier to find a franchise quarterback than it was in the past. And here's why. Let's go, first of all, to the old way, right? Conventionally, up until really 2020, the conventional way to getting a franchise quarterback, a young quarterback that is a trend-setting talent, that can win you games, win you a Super Bowl, and be there for 10, 15, even 20 years. With the new rules, even 20 years. The old way of doing that, of acquiring that franchise-changing quarterback, was losing, getting a top draft pick, right? You tank, you lose, the team stinks. And your goal is you hope you draft a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, like Deshaun Watson, like Russell Wilson. And you hope they can turn the team around. They are essentially the savior. Where you draft them, and all of a sudden your team becomes a lot better. The Colts did it with Andrew Luck, 2012. The Colts were 2-14. Now, granted, they had injuries, especially to their franchise greatest quarterback of all time, Peyton Manning, missed that entire previous year. But Andrew Luck took a 2-14 team, and they went 11-5 the next year, made the playoffs. The old way, the old philosophy of getting a franchise quarterback, losing, and more losing, and hoping this guy can be the franchise quarterback, can be the savior. Well, guess what? That philosophy has mostly failed. Here's why. Going back to when the Colts did it in 1998 when they drafted Peyton Manning. So that's 22 years, right, since the 1998 draft. Teams picking in the top 10 without trading up. So the Chiefs are not included in this because they traded up. Teams that are in the top 10 because they are losing, because they are bad. How many teams have picked a quarterback in the top 10 in 22 years, and that same quarterback has taken them to a Super Bowl? Not win it, just take them there. Do you know how many times that's happened? 7 times. 7 times in 22 years. A quarterback drafted in the top 10 took his team to a Super Bowl while still on that same team. The Colts with Peyton Manning, when they drafted him in 1998. The Eagles with Donovan McNabb. The Giants with Eli Manning. Obviously, that was successful, winning 2 Super Bowls. The Falcons with Matt Ryan. Panthers with Cam Newton. And then as most recently in 2016, the number 1 overall pick, Jared Goff with the Rams. The number 2 overall pick, Carson Wentz with the Eagles. Although obviously we know Nick Foles led the Super Bowl run. I'm going to give Carson Wentz credit because he was playing MVP caliber football. Would have won the MVP if he wasn't hurt. And was playing great up until that point. So I'm going to give him credit. I will give Carson Wentz a Super Bowl appearance and helping lead the Eagles to the Super Bowl. But that's 7 quarterbacks in 22 years where tanking, in theory, has worked. That percentage is not great. Let's go, how about this? Let's go one step further. So 7 quarterbacks in 22 years have led their team to a Super Bowl. How many quarterbacks have been drafted in the top 10? Top 10. Not in the first round, not in the draft, top 10. Because you think when you're drafting a quarterback in the top 10, that is a franchise-changing, savior-like quarterback that will take your franchise from the dumpster to the penthouse. 38 quarterbacks in that same 22-year span, from 1998 to 2019. Right, obviously 2020 not included. So 1998 to 2019. 38 quarterbacks were taken in the top 10 in that span. And like I just said before, 7 of them led their teams to a Super Bowl. That's 18%. So 18% of quarterbacks drafted in the top 10 have taken their team to the Super Bowl in the last 22 years. To me, this highlights and this proves that losing as much as possible, tanking for a quarterback, and then hoping said quarterback is the savior, putting the weight of the entire offense, the weight of the entire team on their shoulders, does not work. It does not equate to success. Tanking works less than 1/5. 1 out of 5 times it works, at best. Less than 20%. So the reason why I wanted to put that poll question out there last night about whether the Jets should tank and draft Trevor Lawrence is because I've heard a lot of Jets fans recently blame the issues on Sam Darnold. You see now, because the quarterback position is so important to the NFL, because it's so important to team success, fans, media equate team struggles to the quarterback. That's just not the case. There are so much more factors that have to do with team success than just the quarterback. So now, the reason why I lay this out there, so 18% of quarterbacks taken in the top 10 since 1998 have led their teams to the Super Bowl. And this was the old way, right? Tanking, get the high draft pick, get Trevor Lawrence, get rid of Sam Darnold. If you're the Giants, if you're the Jets, if you're the Bears, if you're the Jaguars, tanking. That was always the traditional, conventional way to get a franchise quarterback. Here's the new way. Starting this offseason, right now, in a few months, this is the new way that's going to develop. Now, it may only happen in one situation, but it's going to become more popular as the years go on. This is a long-term theory here. So I won't be proven right, again, in one offseason, but it's going to continue. I think we'll see it. The new way to acquire franchise quarterbacks, I believe that's going to happen, is that teams that have aging quarterbacks, teams that maybe are really good but have questions about their quarterback currently, are now going to be able to acquire former top picks from bad teams and use those guys to be their savior quarterback. Here's what I mean by that. I'll use the Jets as a perfect example. Jets fans want to tank. Jets fans want to draft Trevor Lawrence. I promise you, if you're Joe Douglas, the general manager of the Jets, it's going to be an impossible situation if you have the number 1 overall pick or number 2 overall pick. If you're in the top 3, Justin Fields is sitting there, Trevor Lawrence is sitting there, it's going to be impossible for you to sit there and pass one of those guys up to keep Sam Darnold and draft someone else. So if they do draft Trevor Lawrence, which on Instagram, 75% of you voted yes, tank for Trevor Lawrence. Twitter's a little close, it's almost 50-50. That just shows you the split right there. But if the Jets do what their fans want, tank, draft Trevor Lawrence and get rid of Sam Darnold, you're going to have a team like the Saints, teams like the Colts, the Patriots, the Steelers, the Buccaneers, with older quarterbacks, with questions about their quarterbacks, but a really good team overall, being able to be in the market for Sam Darnold. Maybe being in the market for Baker Mayfield if the Browns continue to struggle. How about maybe Carson Wentz? I'll get to him in a second. But there's some questions and some blame going around about Carson Wentz. So look at all the bad teams in the NFL with young quarterbacks, right? The Jets with Sam Darnold, the Browns with Baker Mayfield, the Bears with Mitchell Trubisky, the Eagles with Carson Wentz, the Giants with Daniel Jones. If their struggles continue and their fans and the media continues to put the struggles and the blame on the quarterback, getting frustrated that they're not developing enough in their short amount of time, frustrated that they're not putting up points despite the cast of characters around them being brutally bad. If you're the Jets with Sam Darnold, if you're the Eagles like Carson Wentz, where you have basically no receivers, where they're one injury away from putting me or you at wide receiver. Bad teams, it's a philosophy thing. Bad teams believe that drafting quarterbacks like Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields will automatically solve their problems. If the Jets draft Trevor Lawrence, he will automatically make their offensive line better, make their wide receivers better, make their running back better. That's not the case. So this means to me that these young quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, like Baker Mayfield, like Carson Wentz, like Daniel Jones, and even we'll throw Mitchell Trubisky in there. That's a stretch. But these young quarterbacks hurt by their surroundings, blamed for the struggles, will now get a second chance with another organization because these teams that will draft these quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, will then trade their current quarterbacks. So again, imagine Sean Payton getting a guy, let's say, like Baker Mayfield or Mitchell Trubisky or Sam Darnold in New Orleans next year with that team. Same thing with the Colts. I've been fantasizing on these last few weeks about Sam Darnold next year in a Colts uniform. Their offensive line is one of the best in the league. They have a solid running game, decent wide receivers, a lot better than they have in New York, and a great offensive-minded head coach in Frank Reich. These have teams, right? The Saints, the Steelers, these traditionally good teams year in and year out that never tank, that never are an embarrassment, are always in the mix, are now going to have, it's going to be easier for them to acquire franchise quarterbacks because these bad teams are going to blame their struggles on their young quarterbacks and basically ditch them for pennies on the dollar. So Sean Payton, Bill Belichick if Cam Newton goes elsewhere, Bruce Arians, Frank Reich, even, John Gruden if he doesn't like Derek Carr. They're going to have a brand new, fresh crop of quarterbacks that are almost damaged goods, essentially, from their previous teams that they can take in, surround them with talent and offensive genius, and get a lot more out of them than these bad teams. So now, tanking it never really was an option for some of these organizations that are good every year. Right? We talked to the Patriots this past year. Will they tank for Trevor Lawrence? Tom Brady's not here. What does Bill Belichick do? He gets Cam Newton. And if Cam Newton goes somewhere else, he gets a draft pick. And now, teams like the Jets, teams like maybe the Browns, if they continue to struggle, draft a young quarterback. Well, their young quarterback right now is going to be on the market. So now good to great teams don't have to worry about tanking. Don't have to worry about trading up and giving away massive draft picks in order to try to trade up to get into the range of drafting a franchise quarterback. It's going to become easier because these guys like Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, are going to be on the market sooner than ever. We never see young quarterbacks in their prime, hit the free agency market. It's going to become more and more often. It's going to happen, more and more often, So with that said, why I believe, at least, it's going to be easier for teams to get a franchise quarterback is because now we're going to see younger and younger quarterbacks who struggle in their first season without any help either reach free agency, get cut, or get traded for pennies on the dollar, way less than they normally would have. They're going to get a second chance at life with a good, smart organization, which again to me is going to just widen the gap from the really, really good teams to the really, really, really bad teams who are going to be in the same cycle. Tank, draft a quarterback. He can't put the weight of the world on his shoulders. Well, 3 years from now, we'll get rid of him. He's the issue. We'll get a new quarterback. So we're going to put a lot more quarterback talent on the market than ever before.